Start recording. And open Zoom. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. We begin today's daf. Daf Yud Gimel in Metzia Bava Metzia. We begin by thanking all of our sponsors. We thank the Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Adar Sheni, the Schwartzbaum family for sponsoring all the Shurim. We thank them for sponsoring all the Shurim in the memory of Aaron Schwartzbaum. In memory of Aaron Schwartzbaum, Aaron Yosef Ben Meir, may his neshama have been Leah. We also thank Leah Sol for sponsoring all the Shurim of this month. And the schos of her daughter Alana Bas Esther's successful surgery and complete refuah shlema, and for a safe return of all of our hostages. We also thank Maya Haffa for sponsoring all the Shurim and all the drushes of this month. In memory of her father Ruvain Ben Emmanuel, and in the merit of Hatzlacha, health, and joy for all of her family, Shulamit, Avram, Mariasha, Tivia, Barak, Raphael, and Dora. We also thank Yol and Sark Kelman for sponsoring all the Shurim in the honor of the birth of their son, and in memory of Staff Sergeant David Sassoon, Hashem Yikam Dama, who was only 21 years old. He was killed fighting in Gaza on March 6th. We also thank Ara and Miriam Grossman for sponsoring the Week of Learning, the celebration of their first anniversary of making an Aliyah. We also thank Aryeh and Shoshana Lerner for sponsoring today's Daf Yomi in honor of the wedding of Menachem and Avigail Sheen last night in Eretz Yisrael. Mazel Tov Menachem. We also dedicate our Daf Yomi this morning in the memory of a fallen soldier, Sergeant First Class Michael Gal. Today's daf is Daf Yud Gimel in Metzia Bava Metzia. We are going to just quickly review the Mishnah from yesterday. The Mishnah, I know the Rav started the Mishnah yesterday, but we have to review it because it is going to be the subject of today's entire daf. So we have to make sure remember what the Mishnah says, and we will pick up from where the Rav left off. So the Mishnah described a person who finds a shtarchov. A shtarchov is a document that affirms that a person borrowed money. So he finds this shtarchov, and the Mishnah presented two different opinions. In the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who is the first opinion in the Mishnah, it depends what type of document this is. It depends if it's a document that includes a lien on the properties that he sold. Then he says don't give it back, because if you give it back to the lender, or you give it back to the Beis Din, what's going to happen is they're going to collect the money, and that's going to cause those who purchased properties from the borrower to lose money. Therefore, if it has such a stipulation in this document that allows the creditor to go ahead and collect the value of the loan from those who purchased property from the borrower, then you're going to make these buyers who bought these properties with this lien on it lose money. Therefore, he says if the document has such a stipulation in it, you can return it. If not, he says don't worry about it, you can give it back, and it's going to be the borrower's problem. The Chachamim said ben kach uben kach lo yachzir. Don't give it back. Why? Because ultimately the Beis Din is going to be able to collect from it. We're not going to really get to the Chachamim's opinion in such great detail. That's going to come up on tomorrow's daf. But ultimately, the opinion of the Chachamim is whether or not the document has a clear stipulation in it that says that you can collect money from properties that were sold. In other words, whether or not there is clear indication in this document that there's a lien on his properties makes no difference, because if it doesn't have it, we just assume it to be a printing mistake. Because whenever a person borrows money, ultimately what happens is they are using their assets to back up that loan. So if it's not included in the document, it makes no difference. We'll still go back to people who bought properties, because if you bought property from somebody who owes money, then there is a lien on that property, and whether it says it clearly in the document or not is irrelevant, but that's not going to be today's Amud. The Gemara asked the question. The Gemara wanted to know, will we pick up, when we're talking about this document, are we talking about a case where the borrower agrees that this loan is actually legitimate, or is it talking about a case where the borrower denies that the loan is legitimate? Let's just start from the Gemara. What are we talking about? Ilema, if we would like to suggest that our case is talking about where the one who borrowed the money is modeh, where he agrees that he actually owes the money, so then Who cares about the fact that this loan actually has a lien on properties that he sold? Hamoda makes no difference. The reality is the reality. The reality is he borrowed money. The reality is when he borrowed the money, he put a lien on his property. Yes, he may have sold those properties, but the person who bought the properties bought property with a lien on it. That's why you hire a title company. You want to make sure that you don't have any liens on the property. So now you bought property with a lien on it. That's the risk. The risk just is you might lose your property. So what's the big deal? Why can't you give it back? All you're doing is returning a lost document to its owner. What does this have to do with you? So the Gemara says, and if it's the other way around, if the borrower does not agree that it's a legitimate loan, okay, so what is the relevance of the fact that there's a lien on his properties? All right, fine, so you won't go back to those who bought the properties, but if you return the document to the one who lent the money to the lender, he's going to collect the money from the borrower. But the borrower claims the whole loan is not legitimate. So why are you giving it back? The Gemara says, La'olam kishachayev moda. So let's keep this in mind. In today's Amud, we're going to deal with a bunch of different variables. I want to try to present them to you in the most clear way. Like this, it's going to make a lot of sense. There is the discussion of whether or not the borrower agrees that the loan is legitimate. That's going to be a discussion. Right now, what we're establishing is la'olam k'shechayev moda. That's variable number one. Does the borrower agree that the loan is legitimate? Then we're going to be discussing the lien on the properties, and we're also going to bring in the concept of pirayon v'kinunya. Pirayon v'kinunya really means that a person paid back the loan. In other words, the loan is legitimate. He borrowed money, but he also paid back the loan. We'll get to this later, but what happens? Since he paid back the loan, we suspect that he held onto the document to create some kind of sophisticated scam. How does the scam work? So let's just play out the case. Ruvain borrows $10,000 from Shimon. Okay? In the document that he has, he writes, I borrowed $10,000 from you. I, Ruvain, borrowed $10,000 from Shimon. And all my property is going to be on lien to this loan. Okay? Now, 6 months later, he pays back the loan. He pays the $10,000 back to Shimon. Now, Shimon gives the contract back to Ruvain and says, Ruvain, here you go. Thank you so much for paying it up. Here's the contract. Like this, I won't be able to collect the second time. Ruvain holds onto the document, puts it into his drawer, and he says, you know what? I'm going to sneak this contract back to you, and then I'm going to claim that I didn't pay. And what you're going to do is, you're going to go to the people who bought property for me during those 6 months, and you're going to say, listen, the loan is up, he didn't pay back, and therefore you bought property with a lien. You'll collect the money from the property, and then we'll make a deal. We'll split it. Okay? That's one of the things we're worried about in today's daf. So let's now go through the case. The Gemara goes as follows. What we're talking about over here is kishachayev moda. The borrower agrees that there's a legitimate loan here. V'hacha hainu taima. This is the reason why we don't want to give it back to Chashinan. We are worried shema kasav lilvos ben Nisan. Maybe he went and prematurely wrote the document, and he wrote in the document that the loan will take place in Nisan. However, he never got around to actually borrowing the money. V'lo lava ad Tishrei. So there's a 6-month discrepancy between when the document was actually written and when the loan actually took place. Why do we care about that? We are concerned that buyers of property are going to have to give up their purchase shelo kedin illegally. Why? Because, remember, if the document says that the loan took place in Nisan, now in ER, let's just name the other guy, Yehuda, buys property from Ruvain. Then, if Ruvain does not pay up the loan, then Yehuda, who bought the property, is going to have to give up his property for this loan. The problem is that when Yehuda bought the property, the loan didn't happen yet. The document says it happened, but the loan only happened 6 months later in Tishrei. So ultimately, we're concerned, says the Gemara, that we wrote the document prematurely. It states in the document that people who bought property between Nisan and Tishrei actually are responsible. Their property is on lien, and they'll have to give back their property if Reuven doesn't pay up the loan. But it's really not true, because the loan only happened in Tishrei, and therefore when they bought the property, there was no lien on the property. And the Gemara says, hold on a second. If that's really a real legitimate concern, Yihachi kol shtari de'asul d'kaman nechesh du'huhachi. What does it have to do with the fact that this document got lost? If there's really a suspicion that we're going to prematurely write a document affirming that a loan took place between Reuven and Shimon, and therefore Yehuda, who buys property from Reuven after the date on the star, is going to be illegitimately responsible to pay it up, there's nothing to do with the fact that the document got lost. Anytime anybody comes to Beis Din with a document which says Reuven owes Shimon $1,000 and all of Reuven's properties are on lien to that loan, we have to worry. Maybe the document was written in Nisan, but the actual transaction, the monetary transaction, only happened 6 months later in Tishrei. The Gemara says, no, we're not worried about that with every document, because kol shtari lo rei, hani rei. Most documents don't have any question mark on it. This document has a question mark on it. Now, what does that mean? So, I don't know if you've ever heard a father talking to his child about something that got lost. And the father says, if you really cared about it, you wouldn't have lost it. Now, probably one of the most annoying lines, because I do care about it, but I put it down somewhere and I lost it. I'm sorry. But this Gemara is the Makar, it's the source to that line. Rashi tells us, Hayol v'nafal, since it fell, Isra, there's a question mark on it. Diyesh lomar, we could say, Im haya kasher, haya nizrabo. If it was a real document affirming a real loan, he wouldn't have lost it. He would have been more careful with it. And the truth is, if you think about it, it makes sense. If you have a document which is the only way that would allow you to collect the money of the loan, you don't keep it in your wallet. You don't put it in your jacket pocket and then hang it up in the coat room while you're in the office. You put it in a safe place. You put it in your drawer, you close the drawer, and you lock it. It's not one of those things you just carry around with you. If you're just carrying it around with you so flippantly and it gets lost, you know something? Maybe, oh just maybe, that document doesn't really have legitimacy in it. And that's why the Gemara says there's a difference between a document that got lost and a document that did not get lost. Elahad Tanan. So now the Gemara says, let's look at this Mishnah. It says, Kosvin shtar lelova, you're allowed to write a document for a lova, afal pisha ein malva imo, even though the lender is not there. And you could do this lechatchila, no problem. So the Gemara asks, Heichi kasvinu, how are you allowed to write this document for the lova, nechesh shema kasav livos benisan, lo lova atishrei, vasil mitra flakuchas shalo kedin. The Gemara says, if this is really a significant chashash, if this is a real worry that we have, if we're suspicious that people are writing documents before the actual loan takes place, how is it that when a borrower walks into Beis Din, or approaches the sofer, he says, you know something, can you do me a favor? My name is Reuven. I would like you to write a document saying that I, Reuven, owe $10,000. I borrowed $10,000 from Shimon. The halacha is that the sofer is allowed to write such a document. Why? What's the problem? Tosfos explains. We're not worried he's going to be lying because he is obligating himself to a loan. What's the big deal? A guy comes and says, write a document that I borrowed $10,000 from somebody else. He made a request. He wants to document. What are we worried about? Now, the truth is, we have a lot to worry about because if we are writing a document affirming that a loan took place between Reuven and Shimon, and that document is going to allow all properties from today that belonged to Ruvain to be used as a collection against that loan. Hold on a second. We didn't see any malv over here. We didn't see a creditor. We didn't see anybody lend any money. Maybe the loan won't happen for another 6 months, and the document written today is going to allow all sales from today up until 6 months from now to be used to back up that loan, and that's not fair. Those who are buying the properties today have nothing to do with that loan. So the Gemara says, Amr Rav Asi, top of Yigimel Amud Aleph, Bishtari Hakna, Dehashabed Nafshe. What we're talking about in that case is the case that we allow a person to write a document affirming a loan, even though the malva is not there, is talking about a case where Bishtari Hakna, where the borrower already wrote in the document that all of his properties are going to back up this loan from today. So essentially, person puts a lien on his own properties. You're allowed to do that. It's not a smart thing to do, but you can do that. So if you have a loan that's going to happen between you and a friend, there's trust there. So even though the loan didn't actually happen, Ruvain, the borrower, is allowed to write a document that says, all of my property from today is going to be on lien to back up the loan that I'm taking from Shimon for $10,000. You're allowed to do that. Now, if that's the case, if a person buys that property a month later, they're the one who made a mistake. Why? Because they bought property that was already on lien. Even though the loan didn't take place, there's a document that put those properties on lien, and therefore they should have heard about it. Generally, the understanding of this is that whenever there's a document that puts properties on lien, people know about it. It's one of those things where the word gets out. Today we have title companies that are able to research these things. But again, even in the times of the Gemara, there was some type of rumors that went out. People heard about the fact that a person's property is on lien, and therefore it's not your responsibility as a buyer to research whether the loan happened, just research whether there's a lien. And if there's a lien, and in this case there is, because it's a shtari hakna, he actually clearly said all my properties are on lien. In such a case, it wouldn't be a problem. And that's where a lova, a borrower, is allowed to have a document written to back up a loan, even though it didn't happen yet. The Gemara says, okay, if that's the case, ihachi masnisan, our Mishnah de Katani, which says, Myesh ben achrayis nachasim, lo yachzir, according to Rabbi Meir, if the document actually has a lien on property, don't give it back. Vukimna, we explained that it's talking about keshachayev moda, that the borrower affirms, he agrees that he owes the money. Umishum shema kasav livos benisan velo lava ad tishrei. What's the worry? What are we worried about? We're worried that he wrote the document prematurely, and therefore we're going to illegitimately take property from the buyers in order to back up that loan. Vasi l'mitrav l'kuchosh l'kedin, we're going to take property away from the buyers illegally. Now hold on. Amai lo yachzir. Why would you not give it back? Nechsi, let's take a look. Ibishtar hakna hashabed le'nafshe. If this is a document where he put all his properties in the document as a backup to the loan, and he placed a lien on his properties even prematurely, well, you know what? He put a lien on his properties, and he did that prematurely, and you bought those properties. That's your problem. Hashabed le'nafshe. If it's talking about a document where he did not prematurely put a lien on his properties, we have nothing to worry about. You know why? This document would never be written. In other words, you have to put all these things together. We just learned that if it's not a case where he puts all his properties on lien for this loan prematurely, they would not write the document unless they actually watch the transaction take place. That's what it means, that the malva is not there. In other words, if the Beis Din is not witnessing the loan take place, they won't write the document unless the borrower agrees to put his properties on lien prematurely. So now, if that's the case, if the document exists, then one of two things have to be true. Either the loan happened, or he prematurely put his properties on lien. That's what we just got finished saying. So that's what the Gemara says. There shouldn't be any problem. Give the document right back. Because what are you worried about? That you'll take property from the Lekuchos Shelo Kedin? You're going to take the properties away from the buyers illegally? It's not illegal. You know why? Number one, either the loan happened, and then they bought properties which are there to back up the loan. So you know what? That's their problem. They bought properties with a lien. Or the loan didn't happen, but the borrower prematurely put his properties on lien. Still, it's not illegal. You could take it away from the people who bought it. So what's the problem with giving back the document? The Gemara says, Amar Leir Rav Asi explained, Afagav Deshtari Delav Hakna, even though this is not a case where he prematurely put his properties on lien, Kileka Malva Bahadei, Lo Kasvinan, Masnisan is Kivan Denafel Israelay. Sorry, that was part of the question. Yeah, Masnisan, our Mishnah, Kivan Denafel Israelay V'chashin and Dilma Ikri V'kasav. Rav Asi explains, you know what? This is talking about a document that fell. We already explained earlier, when a document gets lost, when a document backing up a loan gets lost, there's a question mark on it. Something is not right over here. People don't lose those kinds of documents. They store them away in a safety deposit box. You don't just walk around and drop that kind of document. This one got lost. So you know what? Dilma Ikri V'kasav. Maybe this is just one of those cases where it happened. It shouldn't have happened. They shouldn't have even written this document in the first place. But you know what? They did. Exactly. The guy did. But now the fact that it got lost makes us worry that that happened. Amar Abaya Amar. Abaya has a different understanding. And he says, that's not what we're worried about. Eidav b'chosamav zachinlo. Abaya advances a new idea over here, which is, once Eidim sign in a document, those signatures actually create a real shibud, a real obligation of money over here. Which is, whether or not the reality matches what the Eidim signed, says Abaya, is irrelevant. If there's a document that says that Reuven borrowed $10,000 from Shimon and his properties are here to back it up, that's it. It's finished. Whether or not that actually happened makes no difference. Once they sign it, the document actually has effect. And therefore, Vafilu Shtari Delav Hakna, even though they are properties that are there are documents that don't have an advanced lien in it, nevertheless, it's still going to work. Why? And he explains, B'shum de Kashale, Abaya had the following problem. Kivan da Amrit Bishtari Delav Hakna, Ki Les Lamava Badelo Kasvinan. He had our previous question. Since we said that we're not going to write a document affirming a loan between Reuven and Shimon, if Shimon is not present, so then Lekal Amechash to Ikri V'kasav. It's not going to happen. We're dealing with people who know what they're doing. It's a based-in. There's a process. There's a procedure. You want to get a document written that's going to affirm a loan between Reuven the borrower and Shimon the lender? Guess what? Shimon's going to have to show up. We're not going to have a case of oversight where the based-in writes the document anyway. Therefore, Abaya explains that it's possible that the document was written early, but still, once the Eidim sign, that creates a real lien, and it creates the real shibud, and everything is ready to go. The Gemara says, if that's the case, that once Eidim sign, even if the reality doesn't match what they signed, that it creates the obligation anyway. Hold on a second. And it says in the Mishnah, Matzah Gitei Nasha, a person finds a divorce document, the Shechur Avadim, an emancipation document for an Eved, Daitiki, that's a document that's written. This Daitiki is actually an acronym. What it means is it's a document that's written for a Shchiv Marah, for a person who's on his deathbed and he wants to allocate his assets to other people. Or Matana, a document for a healthy person who writes a gift note, or Veshovan or receipt. You find any one of these things, Harezel lo yachzir, don't return it. Why? Shema ksuvim hayu, maybe they were actually written, v'nimlach alayim. The person changed his mind. So again, maybe the person wrote a divorce document, said, you know what? I don't have to do this. We can go to marriage counseling. We can work this one out. Or he writes an emancipation document for his Eved. He's like, you know what? Actually, wasn't in a good mood yesterday when I wrote this document. I was going to free my Eved, but I'm not in a good mood today. So he changed his mind. Or any one of these things with a gift. Shchimar wants to give a gift. He changes his mind. Or a healthy person wants to give a gift. He changes his mind. Any one of these cases, or a shover, a person wrote an advanced receipt on a loan that never got paid back, so he's changed his mind. So therefore, you find these documents, don't return them, because it's not certain that these documents are really true. Maybe they were written in advance and they were never actually actualized. Now hold on a second. Who cares that he changed his mind? Abaye just told us, Abaye, you said, once the document is written and it's signed by two witnesses, it's done. Who cares if you change your mind afterwards? The Gemara says you're misunderstanding this. Hani mili, when does Abaye say that the signature of the witnesses creates the obligation regardless of whether the reality matches that? Hani mili heicha to kamatu liyade. That's only true if the document actually was transferred from one person to the next. If the document never made it into the hands of the recipient, then lo armina, we don't say that the witnesses' signatures will create that obligation. Okay. Ela masnisin. Now they go back to our Mishnah. Masnisin the Katani, our Mishnah, which says, Matzah shtarichov. Person finds a loan document. Im yesh ben achrayis nechasim. It depends. If there is a lien on properties, lo yaksir, don't give it back. Vukimna, we explained right away at the beginning of our Gemara, kishachayev moda, that the love of the borrower agrees that he borrowed the money. And then, why are we not giving it back? Mishum shema kasav livos ben Nisan. We're worried that they wrote the document in Nisan, v'lo lava ad Tishrei, but in reality, that he did not actually lend the money until Tishrei. So now, Bishlam Rav Asi, according to Rav Asi at the top of our Amud, everything is fine. Damar Bishtaria Knaisa, we're talking about a case where the person, the borrower, put an advanced lien on his property even before he borrowed the money. So Mukila Bashtara Delo Aknaisa. Our Mishnah could be talking about a case where he didn't do that, and that's why we are worried that maybe the Lekuchos are going to get ripped off in this case. Ukidamrina, like we said, El Abaya, according to Abaya, Damar Edav B'chosam Zachin Lo. Abaya tells us that in every case that witnesses sign a document, that moment that they sign the document, it creates the monetary obligation. Michael Amemar. What are we worried about in our Mishnah? Again, getting back to our Mishnah, Rameir says if there's a document that actually has a lien on it, don't give it back. Why not? Because that's going to give the beis din the ability to collect money from the buyers of the property who bought the properties with a lien on it. According to Abaya, what's the problem? You're worried that they wrote the document in advance? Okay. When you write a document in advance, it creates a legitimate monetary obligation. So these people who bought the properties that have a lien on it. And it's a legitimate lien, and therefore you have to take the risk and maybe you'll lose it. So why not give it back? Amar lach Abaya says, Masnisan hainu taima. The Mishnah, this is the reason. The chayish lepiroyon v'lekinunya. Like we explained earlier, we're worried that yes, you're right. There was a legitimate loan here. There was a legitimate obligation. There was a legitimate lien on the properties. But you know what? We're worried about piroyon v'kinunya. We're worried that the loan was actually paid back, and instead of tearing up the document and throwing it into the trash, the lova held onto the document, and there is a sophisticated, well-orchestrated scam going on over here, and we don't want to give it back to be party to that scam. What's the scam? Like we explained earlier, the lova paid back the $10,000 to Shimon. Now, they say to each other, we'll work something out over here. I'll drop the document, someone will pick it up, they'll return it to you. You'll come to me to collect the money, and I'll say, oh, I'm sorry, I have no money, I'm out of money, I'm low on cash. And then what will happen? They'll go back to those who bought the property between the time that I borrowed the money and the time that we were supposed to collect it, and those people have to give back the property, and we'll cut a deal 50-50, and we'll both make money. So that's the problem according to Abaya. The Gemara says, okay, fine. Shmuel, who says, we're not worried about Piroim and Kinunya. Rashi explains, Shtar hanimtza v'afil ein chayiv moda d'im isa depare mikra havikara. Shmuel says we're not worried about this. You know why? Because the normal reaction of normal people is once you pay back a loan, you tear up the document. Having a document in your possession that says that you owe someone $10,000 is never good. And therefore Shmuel says normal people always rip up the document as soon as they pay it up, and therefore we're not worried that the document is still here and that there's some kind of scam going on. So according to Shmuel, so according to Shmuel, what are we worried about in our Mishnah? Again, if we're talking about a case where the borrower agrees that the loan happened, and once witnesses sign the document, the loan is legitimate and the lien is legitimate. So then why can't you give the document back to the Beis Din or to the creditor? What are we worried about? That he'll collect money from the people who bought the properties? Go ahead. Collect the money from them. You're entitled to it. What's the problem? What are you worried about? Maybe there's some kind of scam going on here? Shmuel's not worried about these scams. So the Gemara goes on and explains, if Shmuel would follow the opinion of Rav Asi, in other words, he follows the opinion of Rav Asi that you'll only write a document for a borrower if the borrower puts an advanced lien on all his properties. So we could say Masnis Mishtari de Lavakna. Our Mishnah was talking about a case where that didn't happen, and therefore we're worried about it. If he holds like a baya, that we're not going to worry about such a document of a hakna. Rather, the Amar Eidav b'chasam of Zachin lo, Michael Amemar. What's the problem in our Mishnah? The Gemara says, Shmuel mukim masnisa ein chayiv moda. The Gemara says, we understood all the way up until now, this entire daf is talking about where the borrower agrees that he borrowed the money. Shmuel will just say, our Mishnah is talking about a case where the borrower says, not true. La hadam, lo haya dvar mi'olam. I never borrowed this money. I don't know what this document is talking about in the first place. You found the document that I owe someone $10,000? I'm sorry. I never borrow that kind of money from people. This document is just a forgery. So the Gemara says, Yihachi, if that's the case, if our Mishnah is talking about a case where the borrower denies ever borrowing money, so then why is it that Rabbi Meir differentiates between whether or not the document has a lien in it? If there is no lien in that document, why would we return it? You're right, granted, we won't collect the money from possessions that are on lien and were sold, he'll still go back to the guy, to Reuven, who is the borrower, and take money from him. But he denies that the loan ever happened. So why would we give it back? The Gemara says, Shmuel taimei, de Amar Shmuel, Omar hayir Reb Meir, shtarchov she'ein bo achrayis nechasim, ein gova, lo mishabdi, v'lo b'nei chori. The reason why they give it back is because Shmuel follows the opinion, he's of the opinion that if a document does not have a lien in it, it can't be used. His opinion is a document that does not have a lien in it cannot be used to collect anything, not from the buyers and not from the alleged lender. So the Gemara says, okay, if that's the case, if you can't use this document to collect any money, what's the point in returning the document? The document is worthless. You can't collect any money from it. Rabbi Nassan bar Oshia says, "Lotzer al pitzluchiso." You're right. You can't use this document to collect money, but again, it's a piece of paper. So a piece of paper has a lot of value. Didn't have bottle caps back then. You couldn't just get a generic corkscrew. So you know what? A piece of paper has a pretty good use. You take it, crumple it up, and you stuff it into the top of your bottle of wine. Like this, your wine will stay fresh. So therefore, the question is, who owns the piece of paper? Maybe you could use it as a place marker or anything else. The question just is, this is not your piece of paper. You found a piece of paper on the floor. Who owns the piece of paper? So the Gemara says, okay, if that's the case, so then, if we're giving it back to the lender like this, he could stuff up, or he could stuff up his bottles. So Why are you choosing to give it back to the Malva just because his name is on it? Give it back to the one who borrowed the money. He also might have to close up his bottles. Latra pitzu chisa shalova. The Gemara says, what? Lova? You give the document back to the borrower? Lova, who, top of your Gimel Amud Beis, Damar la hayadvar mi'olam. He's the one who said he never borrowed the money. So if he didn't borrow the money, why would you get this document? The whole thing is a forgery. In other words, the only relevant person in this case is the Malva, is the lender. He's the only one who really admits that the document has anything to do with him. Now, he can't use that document to collect money from Reuven. Why? Because the basin's not going to accept it, because this document is missing some of the key elements, which is that it has a lien on property. And therefore, we will not allow him to collect money with it. But again, the value of the paper, you can give it back to the Malva. He can't use it to collect money, but he could stuff up his bottles. Amar Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar says, so now the Gemara is going to go through two different opinions of what our Mishnah is talking about. The machlokes in our Mishnah is b'she'ein. It's okay if it stays on the table here, Moshe? Machlokes is b'she'ein chayiv modeh. Is talking about when the borrower does not agree, he does not admit that the loan exists. And what are the two opinions there? So Rabbi Meir is of the opinion, shtar she'ein bo achrayis nachasim, eino gova, lo mi mishabdi, v'lo mi bnei chori. Like we said before, the Mishnah is talking about a case where the borrower denies the loan, and if there's no lien in the document, you can't use it at all. Rabban's of the opinion that migva gavi, you could collect with this. Let's just analyze this for a second. According to Rabbi Elazar, the borrower denies the loan, and therefore Reb Meir says if he denies the loan and there's no lien in the document, you can give it back. You know why? Because you can't use it. So therefore, no problem. Give it back. Give the document back to Beis Din. Give it back to the lender. No problem. You know why? Because it can't be used. So therefore, we have no problem with you giving it back. The Chachamim say, don't give it back. You know why? Because you can use it to collect money. Aval, however, kishachayev moda, when the borrower agrees that the loan is legitimate, divrei hakol yachzir. Everyone agrees to give it back. V'lo chayshinon lepiroyin lekinunya. You have nothing to worry about. The guy agrees. He admits that he borrowed the money. We're not going to start worrying that maybe there's some type of sophisticated scam going on here and you shouldn't give it back. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Rabbi Yochanan says Machlokes in our Mishnah is Kishachayev Moda. When, the other way around, it's talking about when the borrower actually admits that he owes the money. So Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that Shtar She'ein Bo Achrayis Nechasim, a document that does not include a clear stipulation that there's a lien on the properties, then Mimeshabdi Hu de Lo Gavi. You can't collect from properties that are on lien. Av Mibnei Chori, from properties that are free in the hands of the borrower, Migva Gavi, you can collect it. And therefore, he says it depends. In other words, that's exactly how our Mishnah lines up. The Rabbi Meir says, and if there's achrayis nechasim, then you could collect from nechasim meshubadim, but if there's no achrayis, then you can't collect from properties on lien, but you can collect from regular properties that the lender has. Rabbanan of the opinion, mishab dinami lo gavi, you can't collect from anything, and therefore you can give it back. When the borrower denies the whole loan, the Riyakal, everybody agrees, lo yachzir, don't give it back. Why? We are concerned that maybe the loan was paid back. So two different opinions. The opinion of Rabbi Elazar is that the argument between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim in our Mishnah is only in a case where chayiv modeh, where the borrower agrees to the loan. Rabbi Yochanan takes a different approach, and he says the machlokes is exactly the opposite when the lender. Sorry, I'm not sure what I just said a minute ago. Let's just say it again. According to Rabbi Lazar, it's only b'she'ein chayiv moda. According to Rabbi Lazar, the only machlokus in the Mishnah is when the borrower denies it. That's the case. According to Rabbi Lazar, the machlokus in the Mishnah is when the borrower denies the loan. According to Rabbi Yochanan, it's when the borrower affirms the loan. Okay? And we're worried about a case of piroyin where he paid it back. But again, in Rabbi Yochanan, when he denies it, you can't give it back. Why the chashin li piroyin? We're concerned that it was paid back. Now, the Gemara says, Tanya Kavasei Rabbi Yochanan, we are going to learn a brisa now that is going to ultimately be a proof to Rabbi Yochanan that the machlokes in the Mishnah is when the borrower agrees to the loan. V'tiyufta de Rabbi Elazar, it's going to be a refutation against the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, b'chada, on one point, v'tiyufta de Shmuel, it's going to be a refutation of Shmuel. Remember, Shmuel is the one who told us that we're not worried about a case of a scam. Bitarta, there'll be two proofs against it. Now, what's the case? The brisa that we're going to be working off says as follows: Matzah shtari chov. A person finds loan documents, v'yesh ben achrayis nechasim, and those documents have a stipulation that they could collect money from properties that are on lien. Af al pi sheshnei modim, even though very clearly, af al pi sheshnei modim, both the creditor and the debtor, the lender and the borrower, agree that it's legitimate. Lo yachzir, don't return it. Lo lazeh, v'lo lazeh, don't give it to either one of them. Ein ben achrayis nechasim, if it's a case where there is no properties on lien, bizman shal lo v'modeh, in a time when the borrower agrees that he took out the loan. Yachzir l'malva, give it back to the creditor. Ein lo v'modeh, if he denies it, if the borrower says it's not true, I never borrowed this. Lo yachzir lo lazeh v'lo lazeh, don't give it back to either one of them. Divri Rabbi Meir. Those are the words of Rabbi Meir. Why? Rabbi Meir says, Shtar sheyesh ben achrayis nechasim, a document that has the achrayis nechasim. In other words, it means it has a lien in it. Gova min nechasim mishubadim, v'she'ein ben achrayis nechasim. If it does not have a lien in it, Gova min nechasim b'nei, you can collect from free properties, but not properties that were sold. Now, Chachamim disagree and say, Echad zeh, v'echad zeh, whether or not it has that stipulation in it, you can collect from properties that were sold. So now that's clear exactly what Rabbi Yochanan said. This lines up perfectly with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. So therefore, Tiyufta Rabbi Lazar b'chada. The Gemara is going to explain why this is going to be a refutation against Rabbi Lazar in one point. Why? The Amar Rabbi Meir, he said, according to Rabbi Meir, Shtar she'ein bo achrayis nechasim. According to him, according to Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that a document that does not have achrayis nechasim, does not have a lien in it, eino gova min nechasim mishubadim, can't be used to collect from properties that were sold. V'lo min nechasim necharim, not either from properties that are free. That's what Rabbi Lazar says at the top of our Amud. The problem is, v'ka'amar bein l'Rabbi Meir, bein l'Rabbanon, lo chayshinu l'kinunya. We're not worried about some type of shtick. However, the problem is, u'braisa katani, the brisa that we just read says, shtar she'ein ben achrayis nechasim. Yes, mi mishabdi hu de lo gavi. You can't collect from nechasim which are sold. B'nei chorin migva gavi, properties that were not sold, you can collect from. V'katani bein l'Rabbi Meir, bein l'Rabbanon chashin l'kinunya, and it says that we're worried about the scam. So two things are wrong. V'katani, how do you know that? It says in that price, even though both of them agree that the loan happened, lo yachshu lo lazeh lo lazeh, you can't give it back. Why can't you give it back? Alma, we see chashin l'kinunya, that we're worried about kinunya. So we see two problems with Rabbi Lazar. First of all, the problem of whether you could collect from free properties when it doesn't have the achrayis in it. And second of all, it seems like we're worried about this kinunya. Gemara says, okay, we're very happy about the fact that you just refuted Rabbi Lazar on 2 points, but the problem is you said you only have one question, Rabbi Lazar. Why are you coming? You said you have one question on Rabbi Elazar, two on Shmuel. You just presented two questions on Rabbi Elazar. Gemara says, "Hani tartihu." That was two, my friend. You presented you only having one, and now you asked two. Gemara says, "No." Top of Yudalad Amud Aleph, Chadahu. It's really one. The Chad Tamhu. It's all based off of one question. In other words, the Mishum Dika'amar Rabbi Elazar Machlokes B'She'ein Chayiv Moda, because he said we're talking about a case where the Lova denies it, Hu Mitaratzachi, then he has to come up with that explanation. In other words, the whole thing was predicated on the fact that he said it was talking about a case where he denies the loan. Let's just go a little few more lines down. Tifta de Shmuel Batarti. We have two refutations on Shmuel. Chada Rabbi Elazar. The first one, like Rabbi Elazar, they talked about a case where our Mishnah, they said our Mishnah is talking about when the chayiv was not modeh, when the borrower does not agree, but the Brisa says that that's not the case. The other problem is Damar Shmuel Matzah Shtar Hakna B'Shuk Yaksur L'Bailim. Shmuel says if you find the Shtar Hakna in the marketplace, in other words, that's a document like we said earlier in the shir, which has a advanced or premature lien on it, you give it back to the owner. We're not worried about it being paid up and some type of scam going on over here. So tiyufta, the katani hacha, the tiyufta, what's the problem? The katani hacha, it says here, lo yachzer, don't give it back. Lo lazev. In other words, Shmuel said we're not worried about the scam. That was Shmuel's line in the previous Amud. He says we're not worried about the scams. Now the problem is, again, Amar Shmuel, give it back to the owner. We're not worried that it was paid up in some kind of scam. The tiyufta is the katani. It says clearly in our brisa, the katani hacha. It says over here, even though both of them agree to the legitimacy of the loan, lo yachzer, lo lazeh. You don't give it back to the creditor or to the debtor. Alma chashin lepiroyon. You see, we are worried about it being paid up. The kol shekain hacha, the lo modeh. Clearly, over here, we see that we're going to be worried about it being paid up. So that's, again, a refutation against Shmuel. Okay, we'll stop here for today. Have a wonderful day.